Hello and welcome to the channel. This is the second episode where early graduation, a unique bloodline, and an insane teacher set the stage for Naruto's shinobi career. Determined to live life on his own terms, Naruto's knack for taijutsu forces him to ask whether he can truly be a shinobi of Konoha or will he be pushed away forever. Please like and subscribe for more epic adventures. Now, let us begin. Naruto watched the genin teams file out of the village from his vantage point on a nearby rooftop. The Chunin exams were being held in Kizugakure this year and he had been asking Guy all week to take him. His sensei had refused. He had only been a genin for 6 months and he was nowhere near ready for something like the Chunin exams. He also had to complete at least one C-rank mission and Guy had given no indication that he would be taking Naruto on one anytime soon. The only reason Naruto had let it go was because nobody else from his graduating class was allowed to go either. There was also something about only being allowed to compete in teams, but Naruto was ignoring that bit for now. He would cross that bridge when he came to it. As the last team left through the village gates, Naruto stood and stretched out his limbs. He turned and began to bounce across the rooftops, making his way towards his usual training ground. The village was only beginning to wake up and the streets were deserted, but Naruto didn't want to take any chances. Since he had mastered the tree-walking technique 2 months ago, he hadn't stepped a foot into the village proper. The closest he got was these rooftops. He sent a water clone to get his groceries while he waited close by. He had learnt the hard way that the water clones couldn't stray too far away from his real body. He leapt down and broke the fall with a roll, walking away from the buildings and into the trees. Guy liked to start training at 5 in the morning. It had taken some getting used to, but Naruto loved training. He would get stronger even faster this way. They had settled into a consistent training schedule, physical conditioning first thing, moving on to chakra control and weapon handling before lunchtime. After lunch, it was D ranks, usually 1 or 2, dinner and taijutsu training followed, and while Guy let him go at 6, Naruto always stayed much longer, stumbling into bed around 10. Kakashi sometimes joined them, running him through drills designed to improve his ability to wield the Emperor's Eye. It was hard. If it wasn't for the advanced healing he got from the Kyuubi, he was sure he wouldn't be coping as well as he was. As it was, there was always some part of him that hurt. Guy went all in for every aspect of his training. It was what Naruto wanted, but sometimes he wished that his face wasn't being shoved into the ground daily. Even with the small progress he'd made with his bloodline limit, he couldn't put a scratch on the Jounin. The man was now talking about adding weights and Naruto's limbs already felt heavy at the thought. He broke through the tree line to see Guy already in the middle of push-ups. Naruto-kun. His sensei jumped to his feet. We are going to do something different today. Follow me. Naruto picked up the pace as the Jounin ran out of the training ground. The last time Guy had said that, Naruto had ended up walking around the edge of the village on his hands. His arms were jelly even into the next day. He had no doubt he would be grateful for the training, but in the moment, Naruto just wanted death to take him there and then. He was driven, not insane. He hurried after Guy, following the bright green back until they reached the base of the Hokage mountain. He took a moment to stare up at the yondaime. He didn't really feel anything particularly positive about his father. He'd figured out that he got his bloodline limit from a man, but he had also stuck him with the Kyuubi. He had no doubt that it had been the only choice at the time, but Naruto was the one who had to live with the consequences. His father wasn't the one condemned and scorned by the village. He was dead and free of any repercussions from his decisions. Guy turned to him, placing his hands on his hips proudly. Today we are going to climb the Hokage mountain. Naruto stared at him before switching his gaze to the vertical cliff face. He looked back down at Guy incredulously and the Jounin continued. Since it is your first time, you may use all 4 of your limbs. He announced like that it was some kind of great help to him. I will only be using one hand. We will do this once a month until you are about to climb this with only one of your limbs. Do not use your chakra to grip the surface. He couldn't be serious. He would struggle with all of his limbs. He couldn't imagine only using one. Without chakra, it was going to be even harder. When Naruto graduated from the academy, he was expecting to go much harder on his training than his sensei. He was hoping for some direction and a relatively neutral attitude. He knew he couldn't ask for more than that. He was fully prepared to push himself and train on his own terms. He had gotten the exact opposite. Guy pushed him further than Naruto had ever imagined for himself, and the Jounin led by example. He was happy with the way it turned out. It was tough being Guy's apprentice, and he wouldn't have it any other way. He watched Guy turn to face the mountainside. He gripped a crevice and hauled himself up, crossing his legs and locking them into place while he placed one hand behind his back. Naruto stared with wide eyes as Guy continued his way up, only using one hand. The Jounin appeared to be hopping between handholds, swinging to reach them and still grinning madly. Naruto placed his own hand on the mountain surface, finding a firm handhold. He looked up and spotted the next one, jumping to grip it tightly. He hauled himself up and shoved his feet into the first crevices he could find. He let out a sigh. There was a long way to go. He took a deep breath in and looked up once again, careful, beginning to make his way up. Determination fueled every step as he lost track of the world around him, his entire being focused on the next crevice, the next handhold. He could do this. If he wanted to get to the Sannin level someday, if he ever wanted to leave this village, he just had to complete every challenge set before him. He may get tired and fed up at times, but his burning desire to reach his goal kept him going longer after he should have stopped. He cursed as the moss on his current handhold gave way and he dug his other hand more firmly into the rock face. He tried again and found a more secure lip. He moved his leg, yanking it out the crack in the rock to shove it into another one further up. His arms were starting to shake from the effort, and he was pretty sure he had damaged one of his toes from thrusting it into the rock face too quickly. The sweat dripped down his back as he hauled himself up, his muscles burning and his breathing speeding up. He finally reached up for the next hold and felt a flat grassy surface. His head snapped up and he grinned victoriously as he pulled himself up. His upper body flopped onto the grass as his legs hung over the cliff edge. He rolled over so he was sitting up, panting harshly as he looked back down to see how far he had come. The trees they had come from looked like a speck in the distance. "Well done, Naruto-kun." Guy stood next to him, looking unaffected by his own climb. "You were much faster than I was on my first excursion up the mountain." "Thank, Guy-sensei," Naruto smiled tiredly up at him. "It is not only an excellent training exercise for discipline and physical conditioning, but I have always been fond of the view." Naruto joined him in looking out at the village below. It was picturesque, with the quiet village surrounded by trees rustling gently in the breeze. Birds flew overhead and the sunrise cast a warm glow over the colorful buildings. "This view always reminds me of what I am fighting for," Guy said quietly, his grin much softer. Naruto frowned as he looked out at the village. He didn't think he was seeing the same thing Guy was. Up here, he could imagine that he was separate from those down below. That he was observing the sleeping village as an outsider. He decided that he liked it up here too. It did remind him of what he was fighting for. It wasn't Konoha. Genma rolled his senbon between his teeth as he leaned against the soft sofa behind him. It was a slow day and most of the Jounin were out on missions. Rado had left yesterday. Irika was busy at the academy at this time of day, and Izumo and Kotetsu were bickering at the front gate the last he saw them. He wasn't required to be anywhere for the next 3 hours, so he was passing the time at the Jounin standby station. It was better than being bored at home. Someone entered and Genma sat up with a grin. Ebisu. His former Genin teammate looked over at him, changing direction. "You're not normally around at this time." "I have just come from the Hokage's office," Ebisu said proudly, sitting across from Genma. "He wants me to train his grandson." "That's great," Genma started before a thought occurred to him. "Isn't the kid only, like, 4? He won't be in the academy for years yet, never mind graduating." Ebisu scoffed. "It is never too early to start training, Genma," he proclaimed. The honorable grandson represents not only the Hokage himself but Konoha. He must be trained in the correct etiquette and techniques worthy of a member of the Hokage's family. If you say so, Genma shrugged. Ebisu had always been a bit uptight. During their genin days, he couldn't count the number of times he and Guy got scolded by the other shinobi for improper conduct. Genma would always bring up Ebisu's conduct around the bathhouses. That quickly shut him up. Do you not have somewhere to be? Ebisu pushed his sunglasses a bit further up his nose. Mission, but that's not for 3 hours, Genma sighed dramatically. Everyone is either busy or on a mission. There wasn't even anyone at the bar last night. Usually I can count on Enko, but she's been busy with Ibiki in the TNI department. Genma, you are a jounin of Konoha, Ebisu said disapprovingly. You should really stop going to the bar every night. There are too many stories going around about your antics, and it's not fitting for a shinobi of Konoha. Genma waved a hand dismissively. If it's the one involving a cat and a melon, I spread that story myself. I refuse to let a feat like that go unnoticed. He could see Ebisu gearing up for one of his lectures when his other teammate entered the building. He tried to hide his sigh of relief at the distraction. Guy, over here. The elite jounin turned and smiled widely at the sight of them. My most youthful teammates. How are you on this most wonderful day? All the better for seeing you, Guy, Genma grinned, moving over to let his other teammates sit down. Where have you been? I haven't seen you at the mission assignment desk or challenging Kakashi around the village. My genin is keeping me busy, Guy laughed boisterously, patting Genma on the back. Genma just managed to save his senbon as he was jolted forward from the force. His youth and passion are unparalleled, and he encourages me to reach greater heights with my own training. You have a genin team? Ebisu spoke up, leaning forward intently. I have one genin, Guy answered. He is my apprentice. How do you manage to only get one? Genma asked. Usually an apprenticeship happens after they make chunin, or one genin in the team is apprenticed while the others still train with them. It's unusual for one genin to be apprenticed right off the bat. The last one was Kakashi, Ebisu nodded. When he was apprenticed to the Yondaime, before he got Obito and Rin. This is indeed a special case. Guy said at full volume. He will be specializing in taijutsu, and Hokage-sama decided that I was the best to teach him. I have no doubts he will one day surpass me if his youth continues to bloom so brightly. Who is it? Guy-sensei. Genma watched the QB container trek into the station, mud trailing behind him and a deep scowl on his face. A black sleeveless shirt was tucked into slim black trousers, ending in white bandage that went into the top of his black shinobi sandals. His black fingerless gloves went into black bracers that went all the way up to his elbow. A sleeveless hoodie that was more brown than orange at this point hung loosely around him. His blonde, spiky hair hung slightly into his eyes, and the whisker marks were as obvious as ever. He couldn't spot his Hitai-8. He had nothing against the kid. He knew the Yondaime's ceiling work better than that. It saddened him to see how the village treated the kid. He tried to make sure Uzumaki would at least be safe. Any drunkards at the bar who even suggested physical violence against the Uzumaki got a fist in their face. He couldn't really do more than that. He hadn't actually seen the kid in a while. Talk of the Uzumaki had really died down over the past 2 months. He watched Ebisu's feathers ruffle and braced himself for the tirade. You should not be in here. He huffed, standing and folding his arms. Genin and Chunin are barred entry from this building. Only Jounin may enter the Jounin standby station. You must remove yourself at once. Before Guy could speak up, Uzumaki retaliated first. I'm just here to see Guy-sensei, he glared. What was I supposed to do? Just yell outside for him? You would have told me off for doing that too. Genma had to agree. Ebisu would have gone out to reprimand him if he had done that. Ebisu blustered, shoving his sunglasses harshly up his nose in annoyance. That is no way to speak to your superior. Good thing you aren't my superior then. Uzumaki rolled his eyes before he turned to look at Guy. I can't make it to training tomorrow morning. My landlady is trying to kick me out again and being homeless doesn't agree with me. I need to go to the office first thing to sort it all out. I'll meet you at the desk at the usual time for the D ranks. Genma couldn't hold in his chuckle at Ebisu's face. He had never really bothered with formalities like Ebisu did. It was concerning that Uzumaki was having issues with his accommodation. He was, what, 9? Was he living alone? Guy threw the genin 2 thumbs up in a loud confirmation, but Genma knew him better than that. He was worried too. Uzumaki threw a sarcastic salute at Ebisu and sauntered back out the station, still trailing mud behind him. Ebisu was almost purple in the face by this point and he whirled around to face Guy. You need to control him, Ebisu demanded. That boy is insubordinate and a liability. He should never have graduated. Wow, hey, there's no need for that, Genma interjected. Sure, he's a bit rebellious, but I'm sure he's a good shinobi. He's a worthless nuisance. Ebisu exploded. At the academy, all he did was sleep or play pranks or skip entirely. He had openly stated disdain for the people of Konoha and his dislike of teamwork is well known. He isn't worthy of that Hitai 8. That is not for you to decide. Genma and Ebisu looked over at Guy and Genma gulped at the look on his face. There weren't many times that Genma had seen Guy angry, he could probably count them on one hand. The Jounin was happy and boisterous and always looked on the bright side. He had been the same as a genin and a chunin. That made the times where Guy was truly furious even worse. I will not sit here and listen to you slander my student, Guy said as he rose from his seat. Naruto-kun is the most hardworking and earnest genin I have ever had the pleasure of teaching. He has good reason for being the way he is and attitudes like that are what is hindering him from reaching the prime of his youth. The next time I see you will be for an apology to Naruto-kun. Guy stomped out of the Jounin standby station, the young Jounin entering scrambling out of the way. Silence hung over the room for a long moment. Who the fuck pissed off Guy? Genma looked pointedly at Ebisu as the man stared after their genin teammate, the shock and indignation still clear across his face. He himself also stood and followed in the direction of Guy. He needed to get out of there. Genma had a feeling that this wouldn't be the last time Guy and Ebisu would clash over Uzumaki. Naruto stomped away from the office, unable to feel any satisfaction from his victory. He wasn't being kicked out and he'd even managed to get his hot water finally fixed, but dealing with her always left a bad taste in his mouth. She couldn't raise the rent on him as it was the orphan fund paying for it until recently. She knew that he would report her in a heartbeat to the Hokage if she tried anything, but it didn't stop her from trying to make him miserable. He had lost the hot water 5 months ago and she wouldn't replace the fridge that had broken due to its sheer age. He felt bad, but he had stolen one from the old Uchiha compound. They were all dead and wouldn't need it anymore. He felt slightly ill at the thought of stealing from a dead clan, but that was outweighed by his desire to keep his milk and vegetables from expiring early. He couldn't afford more than one shop a week and he needed everything he bought to keep as long as possible. He couldn't afford to buy even a second-hand one. He shot a burning glare at some woman who was staring at him and she actually flinched, her head snapping round to look back at the vegetables on the nearby stand. He sighed heavily and cast his eyes up, trying to find the best route to escape to the rooftops. His gaze was brought back down by the sounds of murmuring. It wasn't even about him this time. He watched Uchiha Sasuke walk up the street, his shoulders hunched and hands shoved into his pockets. The villagers around them whispered to one another and Naruto was pretty sure he could spot at least 3 girls their age following him. He was the only other kid that was talked about as much as Naruto was, although it was in a very different tone of voice. Naruto was spoken about with disgust, hatred, or indifference, Sasuke with reverence, excitement, or pity. It was pretty obvious that Sasuke didn't like it and Naruto couldn't blame him. He was only a topic of discussion because his whole family had been killed by his brother. Naruto didn't know what that was like, but he imagined it sucked, especially being reminded of it every day. He didn't know what it was like to have a family, people he could fall back on and depend on for support, but to be left completely alone in this world wasn't a nice feeling. He knew that at least. He looked between the rooftop and the Uchiha, hesitating. He didn't know the other kid anything and he would probably just get yelled at for getting involved. But as he watched the Uchiha sink into himself further with each word from the villagers, his decision was made. He walked forward, holding his head high and meeting each person's gaze with a defiant glare. Sasuke looked up at his approach, his delicate features set in a deep scowl. The kid was pale with dark eyes and Naruto thought his hair kind of looked like the tail of a duck. "If you want to get away from these assholes, come with me." Sasuke's scowl remained in place although Naruto could see the confusion in his eyes. "Who are you?" "I'm the only other person in Konoha talked about as much as you are," Naruto shrugged, feeling the glares around him intensify. "I hate listening to them too, so I take a route through the village they can't reach. I can show you, but it's a one-time offer." Sasuke looked around, noticing that many of his admirers had switched their attention to Naruto and not in a good way. He took a long moment to stare silently at Naruto. Naruto sighed, giving up and turning to leave. "Wait." He peered back over his shoulder. "Show me." Naruto waved him forward and walked to one of the side alleys. He stopped, a bit surprised to see Sasuke right behind him. "You'll need to get on my back." Sasuke crossed his arms, affronted. "Why would I do that?" Naruto rolled his eyes, placing a foot on the wall and taking a couple of steps. He looked back down at Sasuke, satisfied to see the Uchiha's scowl absent. He stared up at him with a slightly opened mouth and Naruto grinned at him. "Unless the academy is different from what I remember, you don't know how to walk up walls yet." Sasuke seemed to catch himself and his frown returned. Naruto held out a hand and Sasuke reached out reluctantly. He pulled the other boy up and onto his back, shocked at how easy it was. Maybe all those early morning physical conditioning sessions were actually paying off. He walked steadily up the wall and climbed over the lip of the building, dumping Sasuke down the moment they hit the flat surface. "I'm late for something, so I'll leave you to make your own way. Just don't fall. They would have my ass if they knew I brought an academy student up here." "Aren't you an academy student?" asked Sasuke. "You can't be older than me." "I'm probably younger," Naruto shrugged. "I have a late birthday." "That doesn't answer my question." "I guess it doesn't, huh?" Naruto prepared to jump to the next roof, but Sasuke spoke up again. "Why did you do this?" Naruto paused. "I know what it's like. Not the losing your family part, I've never had one to lose, but the rumors and whispering behind your back. It sucks and now you've got no one to have your back." He backtracked quickly as he realized what he said. "Not that I have your back. This is a one-time thing, understand? You've got to figure things out on your own." "I don't need anyone's help," Sasuke scoffed, rolling his own eyes. "Good," Naruto nodded. "Because no one is going to give it, not without wanting something in return. You're on your own in Konoha. So what do you want?" Naruto opened his mouth but then closed it. He didn't want anything, but that completely contradicted what he had just said. Shit, he had to think of something. "I want you to never mention this again," he blurted out. He leapt to the next rooftop, not daring to look back as he made his way to the mission assignment desk to meet up with Guy. He didn't need to help Sasuke, it's just he understood what it was like. He wanted nothing more than to escape when he was in Sasuke's position. He didn't want to be forced to listen to people talk about him, no matter what was being said. He also still felt guilty about the fridge. That's all it was. Guy watched Naruto argue with the merchant, waving around the shopping list and baring his teeth. He always struggled on the shopping D ranks. Guy knew he hated them more than even the babysitting missions. It was part of the reason Guy still gave them to his genin. It would be good for Naruto to grow and learn from these interactions with the villagers. He had noticed the genin using the rooftops more and more, and he couldn't recall the last time he had seen him in the village outside of these missions. It was not healthy for Naruto to completely withdraw from the village. He understood there were difficulties, but the only way for the villagers to learn what a hardworking and wonderful genin he is was to show them. Hopefully Naruto could also learn from the experience, that he could get along with the villagers. There were reasons to stay. I don't remember struggling this much with D ranks. Guy turned to greet his rival, but Kakashi slapped a hand over his mouth. We don't want to disturb little Naruto. He seems like he needs to concentrate right now. Guy nodded behind his friend's hand and Kakashi slowly lifted it. Guy beamed brightly at him before turning back to continue watching his genin. The argument was getting more heated. Guy could see Naruto's hand twitching towards his kunai pouch, but he was proud to see he was resisting. He remembered their talk about not pulling weapons on civilians. Indeed, Guy replied, making sure to keep his voice quiet. The bloom of his youth is apparent more than ever, but the villagers continue to be blind to it. There is hope though. This is the longest he has spoken to a civilian in 2 months. He missed Kakashi's incredulous look. I don't know if that's a good thing, Guy. It doesn't seem like it's going well. It is still better than his avoidance, Guy said firmly. At least he is communicating. This will open up the possibility for positive interactions along with the negative. He stubbornly kept his grin on his face as he watched his student grab the bag of rice and shove the yen into the chest of the civilian, almost causing the man to lose his balance. The merchant screamed obscenities at his student as Naruto hauled the bag over his shoulder, throwing a middle finger behind him. He could feel Kakashi's stare. This is still an improvement, he insisted. His first week he stole the items and dropped the money on the ground in front of them. This time he spoke to the seller directly. His youth blooms more beautifully every day. Soon the village shall see it too. Your optimism is as stubborn as ever. Guy began walking, following his student at a distance. Most did not think he had the capacity to pass through the village unnoticed, but when the occasion called, he was willing to dim his youth if only briefly. It was a necessary sacrifice so he could support his student. How's it going with him with everything else? Kakashi shoved his hands in his pocket as he fell in step next to him. I only see him once a week or so for his dojutsu training. He is making great progress towards the springtime of his youth. Guy began, his voice rising until he noticed Naruto looking around. A bit quieter, he continued. His taijutsu improves every day and he pushes himself to the limit every morning during his physical conditioning. He has been resistant to ninjutsu since he taught himself the water clone technique, but he has learned the required E-rank jutsu. He's very particular, isn't he? Kakashi watched the genin stomp through the village. I don't know many genin that could manage Mizu Bunshin in less than 2 weeks, much less on their own. Yet despite his obvious ability and capacity to be a ninjutsu expert, he shows no interest and prefers punching a wooden post for hours. He focuses when it interests him, but if it does not actively avoids it, Guy agreed. It is an attitude that we are working on. Naruto-kun does listen to me more than he did when he first became my student, Guy said proudly. Are you making any progress on the teamwork thing? Guy paused. I'll take your silence as a no, said Kakashi, amused. Next time I want to shut you up, I'll bring it up again. It'll be a very convenient way for me to avoid your challenges. While he trusts me and listens to my training suggestions, I have not been able to make any headway with his reluctance to work with his fellow comrades. It is a difficult mindset to break. Kakashi actually stopped, staring at him. Guy turned with a raised eyebrow, wondering what his rival was thinking. There was a strange look in his eye. I don't think I've ever heard you doubt yourself before, he said slowly. Or be even vaguely negative at all. It's not like you. I am not being negative, Guy dismissed him, turning round to continue following after his student. It is not a youthful mentality to have. I also do not have doubts, Naruto-kun is a shining example of the best Konoha has to offer, and I am very lucky to be his sensei. Kakashi watched after him, that strange look still present in his gaze. Sure, guy. His rival fell back into step and they walked along in silence for a few minutes. Guy took a moment to think on Kakashi's words. Was he acting differently? He had to admit that taking on a student was a bit different to what he had imagined when he had signed up for it back in December. He was grateful for Naruto and he truly believed that the genin was improving in most areas. He would proudly proclaim to the entire village that he was Naruto's sensei. He just didn't know how to mend the rift between Naruto and the rest of the village. His student's upbringing was a barrier that Guy had never encountered before. He loved the village and would do anything to protect it. His student was very much the opposite. He grinned brightly as Naruto spoke to the woman running the lychee stand civilly, procuring a bunch without raising his voice or physical aggression. Guy turned to beam at Kakashi pointedly. His rival looked away from him in response. His smile dimmed slightly as Naruto proceeded to pull a kunai on the next stall, his loud voice echoing over the village. There was still more work to be done. Naruto let out a deep breath, trying to calm himself down. Frustration did not help him with the tree-walking exercise. It would not help here. When Guy had suggested the next step in chakra control training, he had been eager to learn. The satisfaction he had from completing the tree walking still lingered, and foolishly he had thought that since he managed that one, the next one would be easier. 3 weeks and 3 damp sets of clothes later, he was ready to scream. He had taken to wearing shorts to training now, and paired with his usual black sleeveless shirt, it was much easier to rinse out his clothes now. He was still resentful of the fact that he hadn't really been dry since he had started learning the exercise. At least it wasn't winter. The heating in his apartment was bad enough without being soaked. The small lake beside the training ground was still cold on the best of days. You are doing magnificently, Naruto-kun. He sighed, although a small smile did escape. He could always count on Guy-sensei for unwarranted praise. He hadn't done anything to earn it yet, but it was nice to have someone on his side. I can only take 2 steps, Guy-sensei. Guy bounced up to him, his bowl cut flopping over his bushy eyebrows as he beamed widely, his white teeth sparkling. He was still wearing the tight green spandex and the orange leg warmers. Naruto would have thought he owned some sort of other clothes, but apparently not. His sensei was still trying to convince Naruto to wear his Heidi 8. He had taken to accidentally leaving it at home now to avoid the conversation. It sometimes made his D ranks more difficult since the village didn't want to believe he was a qualified genin, but he had to pick his battles. That is one more step than you were able to take yesterday. Guy laughed boisterously. His sensei hadn't decreased in volume either. Nothing about Guy had changed in the time he had been his sensei, but Naruto liked that about him. He was consistent, and Naruto was more willing to believe his earnestness this way. I guess so, he reluctantly agreed. Are you ready for your D rank? Naruto cursed silently. He would have said it out loud, but last time he had used that kind of language in front of Guy-sensei, he'd ended up with an hour-long lecture on the power of words and on how some would hamper his youth. It was just easier to say it out of his teacher's hearing range. I may have forgotten I was doing one today, he sighed. He reached down to grab his sandals and reluctantly pulled them on along with his kunai pouch and hoodie. He hated putting his dry clothes over his soaked ones, but he didn't have time to dry out in the sun. Usually he would move on to physical conditioning straight after practicing water walking, and that dried him off. We shall go to your apartment first, Naruto-kun, Guy announced, taking in his still dripping form. It would not be youthful of me to allow my student to catch a cold. I can't get colds, Guy-sensei. He was drowned out by the man herding him out of the training ground and towards the village. He managed to break out of the man's grip as they reached the first buildings, and he channeled chakra to his feet, running up the side. Landing on the roof, he waited for Guy-sensei to join him before he began to jump across the rooftops. He knew his sensei didn't like it when he used this route. He didn't think it was healthy for him to avoid the villagers. Guy meant well, but he didn't know what Naruto had been through. It was for the good of everyone that Naruto stayed away from them. He headed towards the most run-down area of the village. As much as Konoha wanted to believe otherwise, there were poorer and more dangerous areas that the lowest in the social ladder called their home, far away from the splendor of the clan compounds. He was considered below even these people, but it was the only place he could keep an apartment. It still wasn't easy, as his landlady occasionally tried to boot him out, but he had mastered the art of thwarting her. He came to his building and raised the window, deactivating the security seal on the frame. It was one of the most expensive things he had ever bought, but it was worth every yen. There weren't many civilians who tried his window, but he preferred to be safe. He climbed through and popped his head back out as he noticed Guy didn't follow him. "Do you not own a door, Naruto-kun?" "Not one that I use," he shrugged, ducking back in. He threw his hoodie on the bed as he listened to Guy enter his apartment. It was a good thing that he kept it reasonably clean. It's not as if there was enough room for anything else. Everything was in a single large room other than the tiny bathroom, the door of which was in the left wall. His front door was sealed shut with the wood and metal covering it, and there was a small fridge and limited number of kitchen counters on the wall beside it. He had a single couch shoved against the wall to the right of the window, and a small coffee table that he also used to eat on sat in the middle of the space between the kitchen counters and sofa. His bed was pushed against the opposite wall, and the bathroom door was at the end of it. The paint was chipping off the walls, and there were chunks missing from the wooden floorboards. One of his cupboards was missing a door, and the cardboard box he used as a wardrobe was getting to the point where he would need to replace it. Naruto knew it wasn't much, but he liked to think he'd managed to make it his own. Posters for ramen decorated the dull walls, and his small supply of books and much more extensive supply of weapons had been stacked haphazardly against the far left corner, opposite the kitchen. He would have liked a bookcase or chest to keep them in, but they were expensive and it was working well enough as it was. He had plants of various sizes dotted around the room in no particular arrangement. He had just shoved them where they would fit. He had even found a circular, beige rug that he threw under the coffee table after cleaning it extensively. It was amazing what could be found in the right alleyways. "I'll be 2 seconds, he called to Guy as he grabbed some dry clothes and headed into the bathroom. He didn't listen to Guy's reply as he stripped, throwing the wet clothes into the bath. He pulled on the dry clothes and opened the door, pulling on his spare orange hoodie as he re-entered the main room. Guy was looking around his apartment with a frown, and Naruto sighed. At the noise, Guy looked over at him and suddenly beamed. "Thank you for bringing me here, Naruto-kun," he boomed. "Your home is full of the same youthful spirit that you yourself exhibit. The plants are wonderful." Trust Guy to try and highlight the positives. "I must ask why you have bolted your door in such a manner," he continued. "It's safer," he shrugged, trying to be as casual as possible. "It's a rough neighborhood. I don't have much they can steal, but I've been collecting those weapons for a while. I don't want to have to start again." While that was true, Naruto did not mention the more pertinent reason. Disgruntled villagers couldn't take revenge on the Kyuubi brat if they couldn't reach the Kyuubi brat. "How are people meant to visit you if the door is barred?" Guy asked, and Naruto chuckled to himself. It was nice that Guy was always looking for the best in him, even if he had a habit of disappointing the man. "I don't get visitors, Guy-sensei." He was still smiling slightly. "You're the first person I've ever had in this apartment." It didn't bother him. Naruto had never wanted anyone to visit his apartment before. He tried hard enough to avoid people outside his home. Bringing them here would defeat the purpose. Guy smiled brightly at him. "I am honored, Naruto-kun." "What's the D rank, Guy-sensei?" Naruto changed the subject before his teacher could try making a big thing out of nothing. He was his sensei. It was kind of inevitable that he would come here eventually. "Do you have your hideate on you?" Naruto blinked at the question. "Why?" "You will need it for this mission." Naruto stared up at the building in fury, vowing to do something horrible to Guy the first chance he got. He knew Guy liked to give him the missions he knew Naruto would hate in order for Naruto to grow and learn from the experience. This was taking it a step too far. The academy loomed over him, mocking his promise to never set foot on the premises again. He remained in place, as if the mission would go away if he waited long enough. He had to collect each academy Chunin's annual report on the curriculum and bring it back to the administrative offices for them to process. He had been told that it was to see how effective the courses were in creating decent shinobi, but Naruto was suspicious. The curriculum hadn't changed in the slightest in the time he was there, and he could have written a book about everything wrong with it. He hadn't been there very long in fairness, but his point stood. He took a deep breath and stepped over the threshold. He wasn't a student anymore. Once he collected these papers, he could leave and go hit a wooden post for the rest of the day to relieve the stress of being back here. Guy couldn't stop him either, not after doing this to him. He made his way down the corridor, popping his head into the first classroom he saw. A sea of faces only slightly younger than him turned to stare. The woman at the front of the class turned her stern gaze onto him. "I'm here to collect your annual report," he explained shortly, bristling under the attention. "Where's your Heidi-8?" He sighed as he pulled it out, cursing Guy once again. The man had known. The woman scanned the piece of metal before thrusting the pages into his hand, slamming the door shut behind him. He had to repeat this process with every single Chunin he spoke to. The annoyance just continued to build with every interaction. They all knew he graduated. He hadn't exactly been invisible when he was a student here, and between the altercations with the other students and his status, he knew these people knew who he was. They had to have known he graduated. Hideki-sensei had barely looked at him when he turned up at his classroom. He came to the final door and he slammed it open. He was done with being polite and respectful. He wanted to leave and never come back. If Guy ever gave him another mission like this one, he would tell his teacher to shove it. There was a bad memory around every corner, and every sensei reminded him of the days where he was helpless to defend himself. He hadn't realized just how spoiled he was with Guy until he came back here and was reminded of how much worse his life had been. "That is no way to enter a classroom," the sensei exclaimed. "Especially when arriving late." Naruto eyed the man. Brown hair pulled up into a spiky hairstyle similar to the Nara and a long horizontal scar across his nose. He seemed a bit younger than the other teachers. His warm brown eyes were annoyed but not malicious. "I'm not late," Naruto huffed. "I'm not a student. I'm just here to get your annual report." He held out his Hitai-8, already anticipating resistance. The man scanned the object before his eyes were drawn back to Naruto's face. Naruto could pinpoint the exact moment the man realized who he was because he actually took a step back, his eyes widening. Naruto rolled his eyes as he looked over to the students. They all looked back to him with varying levels of confusion. He was about to look away when he caught the gaze of the Uchiha. He prayed that he would keep his mouth shut. It was hoping for too much. "You." The boy stood, pointing at him. A pink-haired girl looked back and forth between him and Sasuke with a scowl. "How do you know Sasuke-kun?" she demanded. "I don't," Naruto shot back quickly. "Who even are you?" The platinum blonde next to her raised an eyebrow. "Why aren't you in our class?" Naruto shook the Heidi-8 in her direction, mentally urging the teacher to hurry up with the report. The man had been spurred into action by his students' voices, and he was rummaging around his desk, throwing Naruto nervous glances the entire time. "That doesn't tell us who you are," the blonde said haughtily. "That's not my problem." He internally cried out in victory as he snatched the papers out of the teacher's hand and left, abandoning the door as he walked quickly to the exit. He never wanted to do this again. Sasuke heaved himself onto the rooftop, checking to see if anyone had spotted him. He'd been climbing up every chance he could get to find that blonde boy again. He had to use his hands unlike the other boy who had managed to walk up it, but he was getting faster every time. He needed to find that guy and get him to teach him how to do that. He had to get strong and the other kids at the academy were only holding him back. He was reluctant to even ask this boy, but he also wasn't dumb enough to turn down an opportunity to get stronger. If only he could find him. All he knew was that he was a shinobi. He didn't know his name, and judging from his answers in the classroom, being vague and unhelpful with his answers was a theme with him. He shouldn't be hard to find. How many other kids were there with whisker marks on their cheeks and an orange hoodie? Irika-sensei had acted like he had no idea who the other boy was when Sasuke had asked him after class, but he had seen the man's reaction to the blonde. There was something his teacher wasn't telling him. He looked around the deserted rooftop and picked a direction to run in. He leapt across the gap between the buildings and rolled to break the fall. He rose to his feet and prepared himself to repeat the process. A voice stopped him. "What are you doing up here?" He snapped his head towards the voice to see the blonde standing on the rooftop he had just jumped from, with an eyebrow raised and his arms crossed. "You know the ANBU will personally shove you off the roof if they catch you," the boy continued before he paused. "Or maybe that was just me. What's your name?" Sasuke demanded before he had a chance to leave. The blonde just looked at him. "Why do you want to know?" Sasuke gritted his teeth in frustration and took a running leap back across. He stood and faced the shorter boy. "It's not a hard question." "Naruto," the other boy offered. "Are we done here?" "I want you to teach me how to walk up walls," Sasuke said firmly, holding the boy's blue gaze. "No fucking way." Sasuke jolted in surprise as the boy turned to leave. He grabbed onto his sleeve but was shaken off as Naruto flinched. "I need to get stronger," Sasuke growled, trying to get his point across. "And I need 1,000,000 yen and a painkiller that works on me, but we can't always have what we want," Naruto shot back. "Then fight me," Sasuke yelled hotly. "If I win, you teach me that technique." Naruto just shot him an incredulous look that only served to make Sasuke angrier. "I can't fight you. Do you know how much trouble I would be in for that? You're an academy student. Are you looking down on me?" Sasuke hissed, his fist trembling. He was taken aback for a second at the confused look Naruto was sporting. "I can't look down on you," he said slowly, a stark contrast to the fury bubbling up within Sasuke. "You're taller than me." Sasuke almost hit him, but he refrained. He didn't remember the last time someone had managed to get under his skin like this, and the worst part was that he wasn't even trying. No one at the academy was worth thinking about, and yet when he found someone that he could use, he wasn't interested. The blonde didn't understand. Sasuke needed to get stronger. "You have to teach me," Sasuke said intently. "I don't have to do shit," Naruto frowned back at him. "I don't owe you anything, and just telling me I have to teach you is not a way to get on my good side." "You're strong," Sasuke insisted, trying to make him understand. "Well, duh," Naruto rolled his eyes. "Now I'm going to leave and you are going to forget I ever existed, okay? Last thing I need is the last Uchiha following me around." Sasuke hated that name. He heard it in whispers around the village. All it did was remind him of what he had lost. He wasn't even the last Uchiha. His brother was still out there, and while one day he would be the last Uchiha after he killed Itachi, hearing it now just made him think of how far he had to go. "Hey, I'm sorry." His eyes darted back to the blonde. "You apparently don't like that name, so I won't use it again. Seriously though, leave me alone." He watched the blonde leave and didn't attempt to follow. He did this last time, acted cold and vague, and then turned round and did something considerate for no apparent reason. No one else had bothered to notice how much he hated that name, yet the blonde had actually apologized for using it. No one had ever done that before. It strengthened Sasuke's resolve to get the other boy to fight. He would just have to find a reason to convince Naruto. He would start by finding as much information as he could on the genin. Naruto activated his bloodline limit, staring intently at the form of Kakashi in front of him. The jounin began to move. Naruto focused on his minute muscle contractions and followed the almost imperceptible beat of his arteries. The world around him faded away until all he could see was what lay beneath Kakashi's skin and tiny, undisputable movements that rippled down the Jounin's arms. Rock. Kakashi completed the action and was holding out a curled fist. You're getting the hang of this, I smiled. Is predicting your moves in Jankenpa really the best way for me to improve my bloodline limit? Naruto asked dubiously. One of the Emperor's Eye's best attributes is the ability to discern the smallest details in a person's movement, Kakashi responded. Breathing, heartbeat, muscle contractions, sweat, you can see it all, and that means you can predict the enemy's movement perfectly. Your timing will mean you will always have the advantage. You just need to hone it. What better way to do that than Jankenpa? And it's not so we can just sit here instead of working on using it with taijutsu? Kakashi waved a hand dismissively. We'll build our way up to taijutsu. Naruto rolled his eyes. While Kakashi did seem to know what he was talking about and he was getting better at predicting the Jounin's movements, he could be very blasé about things. Naruto was just as likely to find him reading his orange book in a random tree as he was to find him waiting in the right training ground. It was a stark contrast to Guy's way of teaching, but Naruto found that he liked it that way. The mix of the two teaching styles made sure that he didn't get too used to one way of learning, even if he spent the most time with Guy. He needed some time away from Guy anyway. The D-ranks were getting unbearable, and despite the fact he knew Guy meant well, it felt like he was being punished for the villagers' behavior, like it was up to him to fix their horrible opinions of him despite the fact he had done nothing to earn them. He didn't want anything to do with them, and he knew the feeling was mutual. He just didn't know how to make Guy see it. The man was so joyful and optimistic, and he loved Konoha. Naruto didn't know if it was even possible for the man to understand where he was coming from. A Rio for your thoughts? Naruto looked up from where his gaze had dropped to the grass beneath them. He opened his mouth but quickly closed it again. Kakashi was Guy's friend first, his teacher second. He probably wouldn't appreciate Naruto's thoughts on Guy's current teaching methods. D-rank's getting you down, huh? Naruto snapped wide eyes towards the Jounin. He couldn't see much beneath the mask and the tilted headband, but his gray eye was soft with understanding. I get it, Kakashi began, looking up at the overcast sky. I wasn't exactly popular with the village myself when I was younger. I was already a chunin by then, but I hated doing missions in the village. My sensei tried exactly the same tactics as Guy did, and it didn't work. When did the village change their minds about you? When I fought in the Third Shinobi War, Kakashi's posture sank slightly. I think it mostly had to do with people forgetting my father existed, though. Did people hate you because of your dad? Naruto asked hesitantly. Pretty much, Kakashi shrugged. He screwed up a mission that cost a lot of lives, and when he died, I had to shoulder the burden since he wasn't around to do it. That sucks, Naruto muttered in understanding. Yep, Kakashi said, his countenance abruptly switching to cheerfulness. But it did get better. You know that guy just wants the best for you, right? He means well. I know, Naruto reluctantly admitted. It doesn't make the missions any easier. Have you thought about talking to him? Explaining how you feel and what you think would be the best way forward? It's hard to talk to Guy, Naruto admitted, constantly monitoring the Jounin for signs of retaliation against the negative comments about his friend. There was nothing, so Naruto continued hesitantly. He's so happy and enthusiastic, and he just loves this village so much. I don't want to be the one to upset him, especially for something I know he can't understand. He's so positive it feels like there's no room for negativity. Even if that negativity would be better for all those involved, Kakashi nodded knowingly. You know, Guy might understand better than you think. Naruto tilted his head in confusion. Guy's father, Dai, was known as the Eternal Genin. Guy used to get into all sorts of fights trying to defend him from what the villagers were saying. The approach he's trying with you is one he was taught by his father. He just hasn't realized that it won't work with you. Naruto sat back in his place on the grass. It was hard to imagine Guy as a kid, picking fights with villagers. He would have thought the man would have just yelled at them about youth or tried to show them the folly of their ways through a dramatic reenactment or something. Maybe I'll talk to him, he reluctantly agreed, although he still had doubts about how effective it would be. Kakashi ruffled his hair and Naruto squawked indignantly, swatting away the offending limb. They didn't notice the rustle of the nearby bushes as someone turned and walked away, his green spandex standing out against the dull background. Guy sat in his chair outside the Hokage's office, his leg bouncing erratically as he frowned in thought. He missed the strange looks thrown at him from passing shinobi, a somber air surrounding him. The nearby guards kept glancing at him. They were almost confused by his uncharacteristic behavior. Guy was oblivious to all this as he continued to think deeply about what he'd overheard in the training ground. He had gone to meet up with the pair, maybe surprise Kakashi into taking up a challenge, but he couldn't bring himself to speak to them right now. Not with what he'd heard. Was he really failing so badly as a Jounin sensei? That his only student felt like he couldn't talk to him? That he felt like he had no say in his training? He knew that the boy was having trouble with the villagers, but he'd been blind to the extent. Was he just making everything worse for his pupil? Guy. He looked up into the expressionless mask of the ANBU guard. The man had obviously been repeating his name. How had Guy not heard him? Hokage-sama is ready for you. Guy nodded and silently made his way into the office, bowing low in greeting to the village leader. The Hokage looked back at him with warm eyes, but the smile dropped off his face as Guy continued to be quiet. Is everything okay, Guy-kun? Yes, Hokage-sama, Guy shook himself. It's something I need to work on myself. The Hokage considered him for a long moment. If you say so, he allowed. You may begin your report on your student. Guy gathered himself and stood straight. Naruto is continuing to improve immensely with his taijutsu and overall physical conditioning. His chakra control also continues to improve daily and he proves less resistant to learning ninjutsu, although he only prefers the ones that can cause extensive damage. His dojutsu is developing under the guidance of Kakashi and he handles tasks with a determination and integrity that magnificently showcases his blossoming youth. The Sandaime nodded along to his words as Guy continued in a serious tone. Genjutsu is still a struggle and his mindset is much the same as it was when he graduated 7 months ago. He had accepted Kakashi's and my guidance, but he continues to isolate himself from the village and his peers. His attitude towards the villagers on D rank still requires much improvement, but... Guy stopped, thinking back to what he'd overheard. But that is not necessarily Naruto-kun's fault. I have been trying to help Naruto-kun's relationship with the village by showing them how hardworking and earnest Naruto-kun is, but I do not believe this is working. They are not willing to engage with him, so I believe his D ranks are ending up more of a punishment than a benefit. The Hokage sat back in his chair, his hand clasped together as he looked back at Guy thoughtfully. Guy waited for his leader's verdict. He had not been able to see how much his student was suffering. He was a failure as a Jounin sensei. So why not use D ranks as punishment? Guy's head snapped up. Hokage-sama. You can stop putting him on regular D ranks, the man elaborated. He's ready for something like guard duty, which involves no interaction with civilians, and while he will be working with other shinobi, I believe this is unavoidable. We'll keep him on guard duty until we move him on to C ranks. Guy's brow furrowed as he considered the Hokage's words. However, Naruto is still prone to acting in ways that are not acceptable for a shinobi, the Sandaime continued. So if he does things like openly threatening civilians or pranking his comrades or such, then assign him a D rank. It will give him incentive to behave himself. D ranks as a punishment, but intentionally? That had never even occurred to Guy. The moment he'd found out how much those missions were hurting his student, he decided to stop them entirely and find an alternative. Hokage-sama, he's young but he is still a shinobi of Konoha. It may be detrimental to treat him like a child being grounded for bad behavior. Naruto-kun has always been a unique case, the Hokage shook his head. He hadn't had parents or guardians to shape his sense of right and wrong, and his academy teachers punished him for doing both. Naruto will break the rules as he does not see them as applying to him, but we need to teach him otherwise, before he breaks a law he cannot come back from. Behavior like this was ignorable when he was an academy student, but I cannot ignore complaints from my shinobi. Guy wanted to argue that this was still technically special treatment, but he kept his mouth shut. No other genin was being assigned D ranks as a method of discipline, but Guy knew something had to change. He could not keep failing his apprentice. Yes, Hokage-sama. He bowed low, his mind swirling. He needed to speak to his pupil. Naruto grinned evilly as he watched the ANBU land on the roof. He and Kuma had had a particularly contentious relationship in the past, and he could not think of a better test subject to try out his new traps on. He figured that if it worked on an ANBU, then anyone ranked Jounin and below would fall for it. That was the excuse if he got caught anyway. He hadn't forgotten how Kuma had thrown him off the roof and into a dumpster when he was an academy student, twice. He loosened his grip on the wires, but before he could spring his trap, a hand came out of nowhere to grab them out of his hand. He looked back at Guy sheepishly, scratching the back of his neck nervously. "Hi, Guy-sensei," he said. "I was just trying out some new traps and I thought if they would work on an ANBU they'd work on anyone and—" "Naruto-kun, you cannot prank the ANBU." They had drawn the attention of Kuma, and Naruto glared at the bare mask. He would get him back one day. The man vanished from the rooftop and Naruto was forced to dismantle his beautiful network of wires. He genuinely felt sad about it too. It was some of his best work yet. Enemy Nin wouldn't stand a chance. He finished up only for Guy to order him to follow him. He walked behind his teacher, a bit confused. What was he going to do? They finally reached a training ground and Naruto stopped, his guard up and hackles raised. He did not like this. Guy was better than the rest of the adults that Naruto had encountered in his life, but he was still an adult. He could turn on Naruto at any time. A part of him didn't want to believe it. It had been months since he'd been assigned to Guy and he felt like he could trust the man. With the way he was acting now, Naruto wasn't so sure. The Jounin stopped in the middle of the training ground and Naruto halted a few steps away from him. Guy turned and Naruto didn't have the chance to spiral further as Guy bowed so low his forehead slammed into the ground. "I am so sorry, Naruto-kun. I have failed you as your sensei and have been blind to your struggles. I swear on the power of youth that I will be better and support my precious pupil to the best of my abilities." Naruto opened his mouth. He then closed it. He had no words. This hadn't been what he'd been expecting. Guy lifted his head back up and Naruto's eyes widened at the bright red patch beneath the man's bangs. There was no reason for him to go that far. What? That was all he was able to manage right now. He'd never had someone apologize to him before. He wasn't sure what he was supposed to do in this situation. "Naruto-kun, I apologize for forcing D ranks upon you," Guy continued a bit quieter. "I did not understand your aversion and was under the impression that the villagers would warm up to you through exposure to your brilliant youth. I wanted to show the village how wonderful you are. You are hardworking and earnest and I could not ask for a better pupil. I now realize that I am in fact making things worse and I hope you can forgive my foolishness." He'd been planning on bringing up the D rank issue with his sensei, but he hadn't expected the man to get to it first. "Thanks, Guy-sensei," he said faintly, still in shock from the whole conversation. "Are you alright, Naruto-kun?" Guy frowned. "I understand if you need time to find forgiveness." "No." Naruto blurted out before wincing. "No, Guy-sensei, I really appreciate it. No one's ever apologized to me before, so it means a lot." He tilted his head in confusion at Guy's horrified expression. "So I don't have to do D ranks anymore?" He changed the subject to try and get that look off of Guy's face. He didn't know why the man was reacting like that, but he didn't like it. Guy was supposed to be happy and smiling and yelling dumb stuff about youth. Guy appeared to shake himself out of it and grinned, his white teeth sparkling in the afternoon sun. Not quite, Naruto-kun. We will cease doing D ranks regularly and Hokage-sama has assigned us to guard duty instead. You will need to work with fellow comrades, but it will keep you away from the village populace. We will also start C rank soon, which will take us out of the village. You have trained hard and earned trust in your capabilities. Naruto felt a grin spread across his own face. He could leave the village soon. Sure, under supervision and probably not for very long, but it was something. Guard duty didn't sound too bad either. Anything was better than D ranks. Guy's wording caught his attention before he could get too swept up in the excitement. What do you mean, not quite? Naruto-kun, you were attempting to prank an ANBU. Guy raised one bushy brow at him. That is not youthful behavior for a genin of Konoha. You will be assigned D ranks as punishment for behavior like that, so you must cease your pranks and antagonist behavior when possible. That didn't sound like Guy's idea. He knew the man better than that. Whose idea was that? Hokage-sama's. Naruto scowled. This had Gigi's fingers all over it. He loved the man, but he had very particular ideas about Naruto's behavior and how it should be addressed. He was probably thinking the threat of D ranks would force Naruto to try and get along with his peers and villagers. Naruto had no desire to get along with anyone, and everyone he pranked deserved it. He avoided everyone as a general rule anyway, so hopefully it would be a non-issue. We will go and get a D rank, but unless you act unyouthfully in the future, this should be your last. Guy threw him a thumbs up. Naruto shoved his hands into his pockets but allowed the jounin a small smile. It probably wouldn't be his last, since he wasn't about to roll over and take the village's abuse when it inevitably came back to haunt him, but the fact he wouldn't be subjected to them daily did raise his spirits. Guy really was one of the good ones. Shikamaru stomped away from his house, grumbling beneath his breath as he hunched his shoulders. Troublesome woman. His mother hadn't stopped nagging him about his latest scores at the academy, and he couldn't take it anymore. He just wanted to nap in peace. She was now tearing into his father, claiming that they were too much alike and that his father needed to set a better example for him. It was all such a drag. It was the early evening, so there were still clouds in the sky, so Shikamaru had decided to go look at them instead. His favorite spot was just outside the Nara forest where they kept the deer, and he knew there wouldn't be anyone around at this time. What was so bad about being mediocre? He would pass with middling scores and get placed on a decent team and eventually settle down with a family. He just wanted a normal, easy life. Aiming high and trying hard was just so much trouble. They couldn't all be the jounin commander. He came to the small hill and flopped down, resting his hands behind his head as he watched the red and gold-lined clouds float away from the sunset. His thoughts began to empty and he relaxed, melting entirely into the soft grass beneath him. This is what he wanted, peace and quiet, and nothing in his head other than the sight of gently floating clouds. Come on, don't do this to me. Shikamaru frowned as an unfamiliar voice cut through the quiet evening air. That didn't sound like any of his clan, but they were the only ones allowed this close to the deer. He reluctantly hauled himself upright to see a boy around his age trying to unsuccessfully herd 3 fawns back towards the tree line. The kid was blonde, with short spiky hair, and he didn't look tall. He was probably shorter than Shikamaru. He wore black shinobi trousers tied with bandages at the bottom above his black sandals and a sleeveless black shirt. Black fingerless gloves and black bracers to his elbow covered his thin, defined arms, and a loose sleeveless orange hoodie was wrapped around his waist. He had 3 whisker marks on each cheek, and they jogged Shikamaru's memory. This was the kid who came to their classroom a month or 2 ago. He'd been told off by Irika-sensei but had then presented a Hitai 8, so he was a genin? He didn't see the rest of his team, and he'd been alone when he'd come to the academy. The boy hadn't exactly seemed pleased to be there, and he hadn't answered Ino's questions, which had driven the girl nuts. Come on, little fawns, go back to the trees, the boy begged. You're the last ones and I want to go home. Shikamaru watched him struggle for a long moment before he heaved a heavy sigh, rising to his feet. Wary blue eyes flickered over to him. D-rank? The genin didn't answer as one of the fawns came over to nibble on Shikamaru's shirt. He brushed a hand over its soft coat. You and Nara? Yes, Shikamaru frowned at him. Why do you have a D-rank with the deer? The boy grumbled something beneath his breath that Shikamaru didn't catch, but he spoke the next few words a bit louder. I have to get the herd within the pen at the bottom of this field, he answered carefully. Apparently they're being checked over by the vet first thing tomorrow. Shikamaru nodded as he stroked the fawn. That made sense. They checked over the herd's health every few months or so. He hadn't realized that time had come around so soon. If you're a genin, where's the rest of your team? He asked curiously. I don't have a team, the boy answered shortly. I'm an apprentice. Huh, Shikamaru had heard of those, but they weren't common. He hadn't known genin could become apprentices. As far as he knew, they all had to spend time on a genin team first. He didn't know what this guy had done to avoid that, but it wasn't really any of Shikamaru's business anyway. It would be too troublesome. He'd leave all the information gathering and gossip to Ino. Do you want some help? He offered reluctantly. He didn't particularly want to walk around chasing deer, but it would be easier with him there. He was a Nara. The deer listened to his clan. The sooner this genin finished with his deer rank, the sooner Shikamaru could get back to his hill and his clouds. He just wanted some quiet, and he wouldn't get that until this boy left. I don't need help, the boy snapped. Shikamaru raised an eyebrow as one of the fawns around the genin escaped his grasp and trotted over to Shikamaru. Blue eyes narrowed as the genin appeared to consider his choices. Fucking fine, but I don't owe you shit, he finally grumbled. Shikamaru rolled his eyes as he walked to the genin, the two fawns walking in his wake. He ran a hand through the third fawn's fur and it turned to push its head into Shikamaru's hand. He rubbed the fawn between the eyes for a short moment. How do you do that? The genin spoke up again. Why do they listen to you? They're Nara deer, Shikamaru explained as he began to walk beside the tree line, the fawns in his wake. My clan has always had a connection with them. They don't like outsiders much. I could have told you that, the genin griped. This kid could rival Sasuke in the grumpy and unapproachable department. Shikamaru didn't speak to the Uchiha, but he'd observed his behavior in class. Although Shikamaru couldn't really blame him, if he had that many girls screaming into his ear every day, he was pretty sure he wouldn't act any better. He didn't know why this genin was so hostile, but it was really none of Shikamaru's business. Do I at least get a name? He drawled as he followed the tree line, the wooden pen appearing in the near distance. I'm Nara Shikamaru. The boy was silent for a long moment before he muttered, Naruto. Shikamaru nodded as he continued to lead the fawns to their destination. He opened the gate and ushered the fawns in, their mothers coming to greet them. He closed it and turned to Naruto. I'll see you around then. Naruto shrugged and began to walk off. He paused mid-step and hunched his shoulders. Thanks, he said, the word sounding like it pained him to say. He continued to walk away and Shikamaru watched him go. He hadn't seen him around the village other than that time in the academy. He wondered who his Jounin sensei was. He abruptly shook those thoughts off. He didn't need to know. It was too much of a drag to be curious about someone that obviously did not want anything to do with him. He started to trek back to his cloud-watching spot, banishing thoughts about the genin. He had his own problems to deal with right now. His mother would notice he was missing soon. Today we are going to learn ninjutsu. Naruto huffed, rolling his eyes. This is bullying, he said without heat. You and Gai-sensei are ganging up on me. I don't think trying to teach you techniques that will make you a stronger and more effective shinobi counts as bullying, Kakashi smiled, long used to Naruto's opinions on the topic. Yeah, Naruto waved off his words. He stretched his arms over his head, feeling the pleasant pulling on his back muscles. Things had gotten much better since he'd been switched to guard duty with Gai-sensei. They'd kept most of their already established routine, although they'd had to switch things around a bit depending on the time of the shifts. They still started at 5 in the morning unless they had night shift, and Guy made sure they fit physical conditioning, chakra control, and weapon handling into their day somewhere. He'd been talking about ninjutsu since Naruto first started learning chakra control, and he should have known better than to think Gai-sensei would give up on something. Naruto knew they had a point about the whole thing, but he just didn't feel as involved with the fight when using techniques. There was a lack of accomplishment and satisfaction to watch the opponent fall from some flood or a ball of earth. I think Doton would slow you down. Kakashi drew his attention back to him. Suiton depends too much on a water supply, and futon is the most difficult if there is no affinity for it. Katan or Raiton then? Naruto perked up a bit. I vote for Katan. He just looked innocently back at Kakashi as the Jounin scrutinized him. He knows that he'd been pretty resistant to this, but the thought of setting fire to stuff made him smile in a way he hadn't expected. It'd be probably best if he didn't give that as a reason to Gai-sensei and Kakashi though. Katan it is then, Kakashi nodded, planting his feet firmly to face Naruto and motioning for him to do the same. Naruto faced the Jounin and watched him with determined eyes. Snake, ram, monkey, tiger, dragon, ox, dog, dragon. Kakashi ran through the seals slowly and Naruto copied him. I want you to keep going through those without chakra until you can do it without thinking. What's the point of practicing without chakra? Naruto asked as he ran through the seals again to commit them to memory. What's the point of learning the jutsu if you're too slow to use it in a fight? Kakashi countered, and Naruto grumbled to himself. The man had a point. Hand seals weren't his strong point, and it would take time for him to get used to them. This jutsu is called Katan, in Jiki, and it'll coat your fists in fire, Kakashi continued. It'll cover your opponent in fire if you land a hit, but if you mess up the seals, that flame will be turned towards you. Fine, you've made your point, Naruto admitted. I'll practice. You're such a good little genin. Kakashi stepped forward and ruffled his hair. Naruto whacked his hand away and sent him a warning look. He liked Kakashi, but it was a matter of principle. He continued to run through the seals, pointedly ignoring Kakashi's dark eye observing him. So I've heard a little rumor going around the village. Naruto rolled his eyes but continued to remain silent. The last Uchiha has been asking around about you, Kakashi said, amused. Did you make a friend? Naruto resisted the instinct to tell the Jounin not to use that title. He could still remember how Sasuke had flinched when he'd said it to his face, and although he was not trying to do anyone any favors, Naruto wasn't that fond of some of his own titles that the village had bestowed upon him. However, that would give Kakashi the wrong idea. He'd been managing to avoid the academy student since their last meeting on the rooftop, and he would not have Kakashi's tendency to metal break that streak. I've never heard of him. He looked up and met Kakashi's eye, refusing to blink or twitch. Kakashi watched him, tilting his head. Really? The Jounin asked, not even trying to conceal the amusement in his tone. You haven't heard of the only other kid in the village as infamous as you? Nope. Naruto looked back down at his hands as he ran through the seals once again. He didn't need friends, no matter how much the adults in his life liked to tell him otherwise. I'm going to try it out, he announced suddenly, hoping Kakashi would take the bait and quite bugging him about this. Katan, in Jiki. His fists lit up in a burst of flames and he grinned. Okay, so maybe when Gai-sensei brought up learning more ninjutsu in the future he wouldn't be so quick to argue. He waved his hands around a bit, watching the orange flames trail after them. Punching someone in the face was going to be so much more effective this way. Naruto, what did I just say about practicing? Kakashi's exasperated voice broke Naruto out of his fascination. I did practice and now I'm doing it, he grinned cheekily. He heard Kakashi's quiet sigh and his grin widened. He may like the Jounin, but it wasn't going to stop him from annoying the hell out of the man. It didn't work on Gai-sensei, the man was way too cheerful and dense to appreciate Naruto's wit. He had to keep someone on their toes. Guy knocked on the window of his student's apartment, sliding it open a second later. He hopped into the room, dumping his full backpack onto the worn wooden floor. "Good morning, Naruto-kun." A groan emerged from the lump on the bed. A blonde head popped out of the mess of orange blankets, blue eyes blearily glaring at him. "What the fuck, Guy-sensei?" his student swore, his voice thick with sleep. Now, Naruto-kun, there is no need for such unyouthful words on this bright and wonderful morning. Guy grinned, which only prompted another groan from his student. "Guy-sensei," Naruto finally emerged, sitting up to stare deadpan at Guy. "We finished a 12-hour patrol." He paused to grab the old alarm clock sitting on the floor next to the bed, 3 hours and 47 minutes ago. "We are supposed to be meeting in." Naruto's face scrunched as he ran the numbers. His student's mathematical ability tended to suffer in the mornings. It was only in times like this where Guy could actually see how young his student really was, before he had a chance to put on his mask for the village. He was so mature and serious with a dry wit beyond his years. Guy admired that in his student. It was so much like his rival, but a part of him didn't like that he'd been forced to grow up so quickly. Guy was here for him, though. He would help his student reconnect with his youth so he could live as bright and happy as Guy knew he could. Naruto was in the springtime of his youth, and it was Guy's job to make sure that he blossomed into the best version of himself. 7 hours and 13 minutes. "Why are you here?" Guy excitedly grabbed his bag from the floor and moved it onto the coffee table. "It's your birthday, Naruto-kun. I could not wait to give you your gift." Something other than tired annoyance broke through his student's expression, and Guy saw a hint of surprise before it was quickly covered up. "You got me something?" he asked, swinging his bare feet off the bed. "Of course." Guy grinned as Naruto finally stood, his loose orange shirt hanging over his loose black shorts. "It is not every year that you turn 10. Your birthday deserves to be celebrated." Naruto walked over slowly, peering down at the green bag suspiciously. "The bag is for you too," Guy told him brightly, bouncing in place as he stopped himself from shoving the bag towards him. "I noticed that yours sustained some damage on our last mission. The rest of your gift is inside." A small smile appeared on Naruto's face as he carefully opened the flap on the bag. He reached in and lifted one of the weights out, examining it curiously. "Weights? There is a variety, and I will go through each of them with you." Guy gushed excitedly. "Some of them you will need to grow into, as we do not want to stunt your growth by going too heavy too soon, but you can apply them to your physical conditioning and your taijutsu. It will improve your speed immensely and add power to your attacks, which are the areas we are focusing on." Naruto turned over the wrist weights in his hands, his expression the most unguarded that Guy had ever seen. "Thanks, Guy-sensei," he said quietly. "I've never had a present before. I mean, Tsuchijizan gives me free ramen, but he does that when it's not my birthday." Guy's grin dropped slightly at the admission, but he quickly gathered himself. "Well, Naruto-kun, you will have to get used to it as my student." Naruto reverently placed the weight back in the bag, closing it over delicately. "I also came to tell you to take the rest of the day off." Guy continued brightly. "You should enjoy your birthday. There should be a lot for you to do with the festival on." Naruto's demeanor quickly dropped at his words. "I'd rather just train, Guy-sensei." "Nonsense, Naruto-kun, you should explore the springtime of your youth and partake in the festivities." Naruto crossed his arms, looking away from Guy. "I don't go to the festival," he said shortly. Guy wanted to push his student, but in the 10 months since the young blonde had become his apprentice, he had learned to recognize certain cues. Kakashi would say that Guy had finally learned some restraint, but Guy knew Naruto was not like other genin. He needed patience, and while even Guy would admit it was not his strong suit, he had to be better for Naruto's sake. Taking on a student had changed Guy more than he thought it ever would, and through his mistakes, he'd learned that sometimes taking a step back was the best decision to support his student. However much it made him uncomfortable with how much he wanted to do the opposite. I will see you at the training ground at the appointed time then. He threw thumbs up at his student, smiling brightly. He hadn't even known that's what it was until Guy had said it. It made him feel warm in a way he'd never quite felt before, and he didn't know what to do with that feeling. He'd managed to avoid thinking too deeply about it by throwing himself wholeheartedly into his new weight training, but the warmth crept up on him every time he looked at the collection of shiny weights sitting neatly in the corner of his room. And now he had a place to store them. Someone had thrown away an oak cabinet and Naruto hadn't hesitated to start dragging it home. It had 5 shelves and stood just a bit taller than Naruto himself. 2 of the shelves were a bit wonky and he was pretty sure it was supposed to have doors, but it was good enough for him. He could even fit his clothes on one of the shelves with his weapons and weights occupying the rest. The only issue had been taking it back to his apartment. He'd done enough physical conditioning with Guy for the weight of the thing to not be a problem, but it was the size that was causing Naruto some trouble. He knew he was pretty short for his age and the cabinet was taller than him and wider than his wingspan. It had taken some adjusting and he'd had to forego the rooftops, but he was almost there. Do you need any help? Naruto scowled as he continued walking. People were supposed to be asleep, not out here bothering him. Here, I can help. Naruto was forced to stop as a boy stepped in front of him. He placed the cabinet on the ground as he glared at the obstacle in his path. He was taller than Naruto by a fair bit, with long black hair tied back into a braid. A short tan kimono was wrapped around him and round, dark eyes looked back at him eagerly. He couldn't have been much older than Naruto and he could see signs of training, an academy student then. No, he said shortly, hoping the boy would pick up the hint. Oh, his expression dropped a bit. Naruto took that as his cue to leave and grab the cabinet. He didn't even have the chance to pick it up when a chunk of wood fell off, causing him to lose his grip on the whole thing. It clattered to the ground and dislodged the 2 dodgy shells. Naruto had to take a minute to breathe. Yelling swears might wake the rest of the village up. Are you sure you don't need help? Shouldn't you be training or something rather than hanging about here bothering me? He snapped. The boy actually took a step back before he looked away. I'm not going to pass anyway, he said quietly, and Naruto rolled his eyes. That sounds like a you problem, he retorted. Go and train or something instead of moping about it. You don't understand. The boy cried. I can't use chakra, I'll never pass the exam. Naruto resisted the urge to facepalm. You were never going to pass anyway with that shitty attitude, he snapped, patience wearing thin. The only thing stopping you from passing is you, so you need to take your finger out of your ass and figure it out. So what if you don't have chakra? That ain't no reason to give up. Learn weapons or taijutsu or something that doesn't use chakra. Fuck sake. He scooped up the fallen pieces of wood and grabbed the cabinet with his other arm, annoyance and the urge to get far away from this moping idiot fueling his strength. Naruto had to work 3 times harder than everyone else, but he did it. He graduated and showed everyone who didn't think he could do it where to shove it. This boy probably didn't even having people trying to sabotage him, and he wanted to complain about how hard it was. He stomped down the street, completely missing the way the other boys' eyes followed him with wonder. Sasuke sat in the training ground, legs crossed and chin propped up on one hand. He was supposed to be training, but the puzzle that was one Uzumaki Naruto was occupying too much of his thoughts for him to concentrate. He hadn't anticipated much resistance when he'd started his investigation. Since he'd lost his family, everyone in the village had fallen over themselves to offer what empty promises and pointless assistance they thought would get them into his good books. He'd never accepted any of it. None of it would change what happened, and Sasuke knew that they didn't really do it for him. Anyone who would have survived Itachi would have probably gotten the same treatment. No one cared about Sasuke, they only cared about the Uchiha. That was why it had been almost refreshing to encounter someone like Naruto. He looked at him and saw Sasuke. It was infuriating in equal measures as the other boy refused to take him seriously. Naruto had a way of getting under his skin in a way no one else in the village had, and they'd only met a few times. They would probably end up fighting when Sasuke tracked him down again, but that only made him want to find him faster. No one brushed off Sasuke. So he'd begun his quest to find out more about the blonde, and had almost immediately encountered a wall. No one would talk, and Sasuke knew for a damn fact that they knew what he was talking about. It was like no one wanted to acknowledge Naruto existed, but Sasuke had seen the way they would talk about him when they thought he had left the vicinity. They knew who Naruto was, and what's more, they hated him. Sasuke had then started just eavesdropping, since asking them directly was getting him nowhere. Demon was the most common insult, although Sasuke heard plenty more. The venom with which the villagers talked about the boy was startling, and yet not a single one had outright said the reason why they all hated him. He'd found out about some of the pranks the blonde had played, but that shouldn't have been enough to prompt this level of anger. The shinobi population were a lot more ambivalent, but Sasuke suspected they knew he was there, so who knows what they actually thought. He had managed to find out that he was apprenticed to some jounin named Mado guy. Sasuke had never heard of him, but he did know how weird it was for a newly graduated genin to get apprenticed rather than put into the usual team of 3. The genin from his graduating class were more than happy to tell Sasuke about how Naruto had been the dead last and terrible at anything chakra related. When he'd pressed to find out how he'd passed, they'd suddenly clammed up. Apparently saying anything remotely positive about Naruto was too much for them to handle. Sasuke scoffed and rose to his feet, brushing off his pants. He'd only managed to find more questions than answers about the genin. He understood the comment he'd made about knowing what it was like to be gossiped about a lot better, but Sasuke still didn't know why the village talked about Naruto like that. He couldn't think of anything Naruto could do to make a whole village turn against him so strongly. It didn't seem fair. He still wanted to fight the other boy. Whatever the villager wanted to think wasn't Sasuke's problem. Someone who graduated early was exactly the sort of rival Sasuke needed to get stronger. Itachi was still out there, and he was only falling further behind. The academy didn't challenge him, but he knew Naruto would. He had one mission in life, and that was to kill his brother. He didn't care what it took to get there. He would find Naruto again and make him fight so Sasuke could get stronger. He had to get stronger. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and share. Want early audio-only versions? Join me on Patreon, link in description. I'm Fox Sage. See you next time.